The cafe's cozy atmosphere wrapped around Emily Parker like a warm blanket as she stepped inside. It was a stark contrast to the crisp autumn air outside. Her fingers clutched the strap of her bag tightly as she scanned the room, looking for him. Daniel, the man she'd been chatting with online for months. Today was the day they'd finally meet in person. Her heart thudded as her eyes darted across the sea of tables. "Blue shirt, corner table," she whispered to herself, repeating his description like a mantra. The nerves that had been building all morning bubbled up again. What if he didn't like her? What if he wasn't what she'd imagined? Worse, what if she wasn't what he'd imagined? There, she spotted him, or at least someone who matched the description. A man in a crisp blue shirt sat at a table near the window, his attention focused on a tablet in front of him. Emily hesitated, smoothing her skirt and willing her legs to move forward. She took a deep breath and approached. "Hi," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Daniel?" The man looked up, his deep blue eyes locking onto hers. His features were sharp, his demeanor calm yet commanding. For a moment, Emily was taken aback. He was different from how she'd pictured Daniel. But then again, online profiles didn't always capture reality. "No, I'm not Daniel," he said after a beat, his lips curving into a faint smile. "But if you'd like to sit, you're welcome." Emily blinked, her cheeks flushing with heat. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Wrong table." She moved to step away, but his voice stopped her. "Wait, why don't you join me for a moment? Unless, of course, you're in a rush to find the real Daniel." There was something in his tone, amused, curious, that made her pause. Embarrassed but too flustered to argue, she nodded and slid into the seat across from him. "I really shouldn't," she said, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'm supposed to be meeting someone. And yet, here you are," he said with a playful lift of his brow. "I won't keep you long. It's not every day a stranger sits at my table." Emily couldn't help but smile at his light-heartedness. "I guess that makes two of us having unusual days." The man set his tablet aside, giving her his full attention. "So what brings you here? Besides mistaking me for someone else, of course." "It's—" Emily hesitated, unsure how much to share with a stranger. "Just a meeting. Someone I've been talking to online." "Ah, the infamous online meeting," he said, his voice tinged with humor. "A brave endeavor. How long have you been talking?" 3 months, she replied. "It's the first time we're meeting in person." "That explains the nerves," he said, his gaze steady but kind. "And the mistaken table." Emily laughed softly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "It's not exactly how I imagined things going." He leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "Life rarely goes as planned. Sometimes the unexpected leads to better things." His words lingered in her mind as their conversation unfolded. She couldn't quite understand why, but there was a warmth to his presence that felt oddly familiar. They talked about everything and nothing, her favorite books, his thoughts on travel, the little quirks of cafe culture. Time seemed to slip away, and for a moment she forgot about Daniel entirely. It wasn't until her phone buzzed on the table that she was jolted back to reality. She glanced at the screen, her heart sinking. A text from Daniel read, "I'm here. Blue shirt, back corner. Where are you?" Her stomach twisted in guilt. She had been so caught up in this unexpected conversation that she'd completely forgotten about him. "I'm so sorry," she said abruptly, standing up. "I didn't mean to take up so much of your time. I really need to go." The man stood as well, his expression unreadable. "No need to apologize. I enjoyed the detour." "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere, "for, well, everything." "Perhaps we'll cross paths again," he said, a hint of something she couldn't place in his tone. He extended his hand and she shook it, noticing the warmth of his grip before quickly retreating. Emily hurried across the cafe, her cheeks burning as she approached the correct table. There he was, Daniel, just as she'd expected. He greeted her with a warm smile, and she apologized profusely for being late. But as they settled into conversation, her thoughts kept drifting back to the man she'd left behind. When she glanced back toward his table, it was empty. Only a half-finished cup of coffee remained, the imprint of his presence already fading from view. Emily doesn't yet realize that the stranger she just met will soon become a pivotal figure in her life and her career. What lies ahead will change everything. Emily adjusted her bag strap nervously as she stepped into the bright, modern offices of Crestwell Industries on Monday morning. The weekend's events still played on a loop in her mind, leaving her both unsettled and distracted. She couldn't stop thinking about the man she'd accidentally met at the cafe. There was something about him, his sharp yet kind eyes, his confident but approachable demeanor, that lingered in her thoughts far longer than she wanted to admit. But now wasn't the time to dwell. Emily had started her new job just a week ago, and her priority was proving herself. She was lucky to have landed this role. The competition had been intense, and she was well aware of how coveted even entry-level positions were at Crestwell. It was her first step toward a better future, away from the financial struggles that had marked most of her life. As she made her way to her desk, Emily glanced around the bustling office, marveling at the sheer size and sophistication of it all. Everything about Crestwell screamed success, from the state-of-the-art workstations to the panoramic city views through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a far cry from the tiny shared apartment she returned to each night. "Good morning, Emily," a cheerful voice called out. It was Sophie, her desk neighbor, and the closest thing to a friend she'd made so far. Sophie had been with the company for 2 years and had taken Emily under her wing since day one. "Morning, Sophie," Emily replied, forcing a smile. "You okay?" Sophie asked, tilting her head. "You look a little preoccupied." Emily hesitated. Should she mention the stranger at the cafe? No, that would sound ridiculous. Instead, she shook her head. "Just a little nervous. Still settling in, I guess." Sophie nodded knowingly. "I get it. This place can be intimidating at first, but don't worry. You'll find your rhythm. Just remember, the most important thing here is to stay on top of your tasks and make a good impression. The execs notice everything." Emily's stomach fluttered at the mention of the executives. "Have you ever met any of them?" Sophie chuckled. "Not directly, no. Well, except for the occasional email from Mr. Hayes. He's the big boss, you know." The name barely registered with Emily. "Mr. Hayes?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Alexander Hayes, the CEO, the guy whose face is on half the industry magazines." Emily blinked, recalling the name from the employee handbook. She hadn't given him much thought beyond his title. CEOs were so far removed from her day-to-day reality that they seemed almost fictional. "Right, of course. Don't worry, you're not likely to see him unless you do something extraordinary or catastrophic," Sophie said with a grin. "Now let's get to work before Harris starts breathing down our necks." Harris, their department manager, was known for his exacting standards and short temper. Emily spent the next several hours buried in spreadsheets and emails, determined to stay ahead of her assignments. By the time lunch rolled around, she felt more at ease, the familiarity of routine settling over her like a comfort blanket. Still, the memory of the cafe encounter refused to fade. She found herself stealing glances at the corner of the office, where a group of executives had gathered for a brief meeting. One of them, a tall man in a tailored suit, caught her eye, his presence radiating the same quiet confidence as the stranger from the cafe. But it couldn't be him, could it? Shaking off the thought, Emily turned back to her work. She was here to focus, not chase daydreams. 2 days later, Emily was summoned to a last-minute meeting. The email had been brief. "Join us in conference room B at 10:30. Bring your current project updates." It wasn't unusual, but the lack of detail left her uneasy. Sophie noticed her fidgeting and offered a reassuring smile. "Relax," Sophie said. "It's probably just Harris wanting to check in. You've been doing great. He won't have anything to complain about." Emily nodded, though her nerves refused to settle. She arrived at the conference room a few minutes early, clutching her notebook tightly. To her surprise, the room wasn't empty. 2 senior managers were already seated, along with a man whose back was turned to her. He stood near the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the cityscape. "Good morning," Emily said quietly, taking a seat. The man by the window turned at the sound of her voice, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was him, the man from the cafe. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. She stared at him, her mind racing. What was he doing here? And why was he in this meeting? Before she could process any of it, one of the managers spoke. "Emily, this is Mr. Hayes." The words hit her like a freight train. Mr. Hayes? Her stomach churned as realization dawned. This wasn't just some charming stranger. This was Alexander Hayes, the CEO of Crestwell Industries, the man who held her entire career in his hands. Alexander's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He extended a hand to her, his voice calm and professional. "Emily, it's a pleasure to meet you formally." Her mouth went dry as she shook his hand, struggling to maintain her composure. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't realize that I'm the same man you mistook for someone else at the cafe," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. Emily's cheeks burned. She couldn't believe this was happening. "I'm so sorry about that. I had no idea." "There's no need to apologize," Alexander interrupted smoothly. "It was a memorable meeting. Now let's focus on the matter at hand." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Emily did her best to present her updates, but her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Every time she glanced at Alexander, she felt a mix of embarrassment, awe, and something she couldn't quite define. He was calm, confident, and entirely in control, as though their encounter at the cafe had been nothing more than a passing curiosity. But for Emily, it had been more. And now, knowing who he really was, the memory of that day felt even more surreal. After the meeting, Emily returned to her desk, still reeling. Sophie noticed her pale face and leaned in. "Hey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Emily lied, her voice shaky. "It was just an intense meeting." "Welcome to Crestwell," Sophie said with a laugh. "You'll get used to it." But Emily wasn't sure she would. How could she, when the man she'd shared an unguarded moment with was not just a stranger but her boss? And why did she feel such a pull toward him, despite knowing how impossible it was? The rest of the week passed in a haze of work and self-reflection. Emily threw herself into her tasks, hoping to distract herself from the tangled mess of emotions inside her. But every time she saw Alexander in the office, or even thought of him, her heart skipped a beat. And then, on Friday afternoon, an unexpected email arrived in her inbox. From Alexander Hayes. Subject: "Follow up, Emily. I'd like to continue our discussion from earlier this week. Please meet me in my office at 4:00. Best regards, Alexander Hayes." Emily stared at the email, her pulse racing. What could he possibly want? Had she done something wrong? Or was this about the cafe incident? The possibilities swirled in her mind, each one more nerve-wracking than the last. By the time 4:00 rolled around, Emily felt like she was walking to her doom. She knocked softly on Alexander's office door, her heart pounding in her chest. "Come in," came his steady voice. She stepped inside, her palms damp. Alexander looked up from his desk, his expression calm but unreadable. He gestured for her to sit, and she obeyed, feeling like a child awaiting reprimand. "I wanted to speak with you about your work," he began, his tone measured. "You've shown great promise in your short time here, and I think you have potential." Emily blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. That means a lot." "There's something else," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "Our encounter at the cafe. Do you believe in coincidences, Emily?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emily's breath hitched as she met his gaze, her thoughts spiraling. Emily is left questioning the nature of her connection with Alexander, unaware of the deeper intentions behind his words. What does he truly want from her, and how will this newfound tension impact her life? The weekend arrived, but Emily couldn't relax. The conversation with Alexander Hayes, or Mr. Hayes as she kept reminding herself to think of him, played in her mind like a looping soundtrack. His words lingered, especially the question he'd asked. "Do you believe in coincidences, Emily?" What had he meant by that? Was it a simple reflection on their unexpected meeting at the cafe, or something more? She'd replayed their conversation in his office countless times, searching for clues. Though he'd maintained a professional demeanor, there was an undercurrent of something else, an interest or curiosity she couldn't quite place. Desperate for clarity, Emily decided to throw herself into her work. If she could focus on excelling at her job, maybe she'd stop thinking about him altogether. But when Monday morning rolled around, the universe had other plans. Emily was organizing files in the shared workspace when Sophie burst in, her excitement palpable. "Guess what? We're getting reassigned, temporarily. Big project. Harris told me this morning." "Reassigned?" Emily asked, her stomach tightening. "To where?" "The executive floor," Sophie said, her grin widening. "Can you believe it? We'll be working directly with the leadership team for the next 2 weeks. It's an all-hands-on-deck situation, something about a major client deal." Emily's heart sank. The executive floor meant proximity to Alexander, and while she'd promised herself she could handle it, the thought of being around him more often left her feeling unmoored. She forced a smile for Sophie's sake. That's Exciting. It's career-changing, Sophie said, oblivious to Emily's apprehension. This is our chance to show them what we're capable of. You're nervous, aren't you? A little, Emily admitted. Sophie gave her an encouraging nudge. You'll be great. Just remember, confidence is key. The executive floor was everything Emily had imagined. Sleek, modern, and intimidatingly polished. It felt like stepping into another world, one where every detail was meticulously designed to exude power and success. As Emily and Sophie settled into their temporary workstations, she tried to focus on the tasks at hand, but every time Alexander's name appeared in an email or document, her pulse quickened. By the third day, Emily was starting to find her rhythm. She was handling research, compiling reports, and double-checking presentations with a diligence that even impressed Sophie. For the most part, she managed to avoid direct interactions with Alexander, though she occasionally caught glimpses of him moving through the office with his characteristic calm authority. That reprieve didn't last long. Late Wednesday afternoon, Emily was called into a last-minute brainstorming session. To her dismay, Alexander was leading the meeting. She walked into the boardroom, trying to exude the confidence Sophie had advised, but the moment his eyes met hers, her resolve wavered. "Emily," he said, nodding in acknowledgement, "take a seat. We'll need your input on this." The meeting was intense, with ideas flying back and forth as the team worked to finalize a proposal for a major client. Emily did her best to contribute, offering insights where she could. To her surprise, Alexander seemed particularly interested in her perspective, asking her direct questions and encouraging her to elaborate. By the end of the session, her nerves had transformed into a strange mix of pride and exhilaration. She couldn't deny that working with him, despite the complexity of their dynamic, was thrilling in a way she hadn't anticipated. As the team filed out of the room, Alexander stopped her. "Emily, a word." Her heart raced as she turned to face him. "Yes, Mr. Hayes." He gestured toward the window, where the city skyline stretched out in the fading light. "You handled yourself well in there. Your contributions were insightful." "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her for a moment, as though weighing his next words carefully. "I meant what I said before, about coincidences." Emily's breath hitched. "I'm not sure I understand." "Life has a way of placing people in your path at the right time," he said, his tone softer than she'd expected. "Sometimes it's up to us to recognize the opportunity." Before she could respond, he turned back toward the table, signaling the end of their conversation. Emily walked away, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions and possibilities. What opportunity was he referring to? And why did it feel like he was speaking about more than just work? The following week brought new complications. Emily and Sophie were assigned to manage logistics for an upcoming event, a high-profile dinner for executives and clients. The task was daunting, requiring coordination with vendors, meticulous planning, and long hours. Emily threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. But as the event drew closer, her interactions with Alexander became more frequent. He was deeply involved in the planning, reviewing every detail and making adjustments with precision. Though their exchanges remained professional, there was an unspoken tension that neither seemed able to ignore. By the night of the event, Emily was running on adrenaline. She'd spent the entire day ensuring everything was perfect, from the seating arrangements to the lighting. As the guests began to arrive, she watched from the sidelines, relieved that everything was going smoothly. That relief was short-lived. "Emily," Sophie hissed, appearing at her side, "we have a problem." "What's wrong?" Emily asked, her pulse quickening. "One of the VIP guests had a last-minute cancellation. We need to fill the seat, and Mr. Hayes wants someone from the team to step in." Emily's stomach dropped. "You mean me?" Sophie nodded. "He specifically asked for you." Emily felt a wave of panic. She wasn't dressed for the occasion. Her outfit was professional, but nowhere near the level of elegance required for such an event. More than that, the thought of sitting at the same table as Alexander and his high-powered guests was terrifying. "You'll be fine," Sophie said, giving her an encouraging nudge. "Just be yourself." Before Emily could protest, she was ushered into the dining area. The table was a vision of sophistication, adorned with crystal glasses and floral centerpieces. She took the empty seat, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them in her lap. Alexander was seated across from her, his gaze calm and steady. He greeted her with a small nod, his expression unreadable. As the dinner progressed, Emily found herself drawn into the conversation, much to her surprise. The guests were warm and engaging, and Alexander occasionally directed questions her way, encouraging her to share her thoughts. By the time dessert was served, she felt more at ease, though the undercurrent of tension between her and Alexander remained. When the dinner concluded, Emily excused herself, needing a moment to collect her thoughts. She stepped out onto the balcony, the cool night air a welcome reprieve from the intensity of the evening. She leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights. "I thought I might find you here," a familiar voice said behind her. She turned to see Alexander, his hands in his pockets as he approached. He stopped a few feet away, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. "Are you enjoying the evening?" he asked. "It's been an experience," she said honestly. "Thank you for including me." He nodded, his gaze searching hers. "You handled yourself well tonight, Emily, but I suspect there's something on your mind." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. Finally, she said, "It's just all of this. Working here, meeting you. It's more than I ever imagined." Alexander took a step closer, his expression softening. "Sometimes, life surprises us in ways we don't expect. You belong here, Emily. Don't doubt that." Her breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. For a moment, it felt like the rest of the world had fallen away, leaving only the two of them standing on that balcony. But the spell was broken when Sophie appeared, her voice breaking the silence. "Emily, there you are. We need you inside." Emily turned back to Alexander, her cheeks flushing. "Excuse me," she said quickly before hurrying away. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Emily couldn't stop replaying the evening in her mind. The way Alexander had looked at her, the things he'd said, it all felt like a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. But one thing was clear: whatever was happening between them, it was far from over, and deep down, she wasn't sure she wanted it to be. The tension between Emily and Alexander is undeniable, but their growing connection is fraught with complications. How far is Alexander willing to go to explore what's unfolding between them, and what will Emily risk in return? The days following the dinner event passed in a blur for Emily. Though she returned to her usual tasks, the memory of that evening lingered, vivid and all-consuming. The look in Alexander's eyes on the balcony had been more than professional. It was personal, layered with meaning she couldn't decipher, but couldn't forget. Emily tried to push the moment aside, reasoning that she'd misread the situation. Alexander Hayes was her boss, the CEO of one of the most prestigious companies in the city. There was no place for anything beyond a professional relationship. Yet, despite her best efforts, thoughts of him crept into her mind at the most unexpected times. She replayed their conversations, his subtle glances, his calm confidence, and the way he seemed to see something in her that even she struggled to recognize. That Friday, Emily received an email from the executive office. It was a meeting request for Monday morning, Alexander Hayes' office, 9 a.m. sharp. Her heart sank as she stared at the screen. What could he possibly want? Had she crossed a line without realizing it? Was this the end of her fledgling career at Crestwell? Sophie noticed her distress and leaned over. "What's that look for?" "I've been summoned," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "To Mr. Hayes' office." Sophie's eyes widened. "Oh wow, that's either really good or really bad. What did you do?" "Nothing, at least I don't think I did." Emily's voice wavered. "What if I messed something up? What if I said the wrong thing at the dinner?" Sophie squeezed her arm reassuringly. "Relax. If you'd done something terrible, Harris would have been on your case by now. Just go in there, be professional, and stay calm." Easier said than done, Emily thought. The weekend was a sleepless storm of anxiety and second-guessing. By the time Monday morning arrived, she was a bundle of nerves. Emily stepped into Alexander's office promptly at 9 a.m. The space was as commanding as the man himself. Spacious, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the room in natural light. Alexander stood near the windows, his back to her, hands tucked casually into his pockets. He turned as she entered, his gaze steady and unreadable. "Good morning, Emily," he said, gesturing for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. He sat across from her, folding his hands on the desk. For a moment he said nothing, simply studying her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "I wanted to thank you again for your work on the event," he began. "It was a success, and your contributions didn't go unnoticed." Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you. I'm glad everything went well." He nodded but didn't look away. "There's something else I'd like to discuss. Something more personal." Her heart began to race. Personal? What could he mean? "I value professionalism above all else," Alexander continued, his tone measured, "but I also believe in acknowledging the human side of what we do. Emily, our encounter at the cafe wasn't just a coincidence. At least not in how it's unfolded." Emily stared at him, her mind spinning. Was this happening? Was he acknowledging the same connection she'd felt? "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything," he said, leaning forward slightly. "But I want to be clear, whatever this is, this connection, I won't let it compromise your position here. Your work is what brought you to Crestwell, and it's what will keep you here." She nodded, her emotions a confusing swirl of relief and disbelief. "I appreciate that, Mr. Hayes." "Alexander," he corrected gently. "At least, in this context." Emily hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The boundaries between them felt blurred, fragile yet undeniable. Finally, she said, "Alexander, I don't know what to make of this. You're my boss. This isn't normal." "No, it isn't," he agreed. "But sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the unexpected." The room fell into a charged silence, the weight of his words settling over them. Finally, Alexander leaned back, his expression softening. "Take your time, Emily. I don't expect an answer today. I just wanted you to know where I stand." The days that followed were both exhilarating and overwhelming. Emily couldn't stop thinking about Alexander's words, his openness, and the possibilities they hinted at. But she also couldn't ignore the risks. What would Sophie think? What would the rest of the company think if they found out? And how could she trust her own feelings in such an unbalanced dynamic? She threw herself into her work, hoping for clarity, but the tension between them only grew. Each passing interaction, each stolen glance seemed to heighten the unspoken understanding between them. It all came to a head one rainy evening when Emily stayed late to finish a project. The office was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound as she worked. She was startled when a knock on the doorframe broke the silence. Turning, she saw Alexander standing there, his suit jacket draped over one arm. "You're still here," he said, stepping into the room. "I wanted to finish this report," she replied, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone they were. He moved closer, setting his jacket on a nearby chair. "You're dedicated. I admire that." "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain against the windows filled the space as Alexander looked at her, his expression unguarded. "Emily," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. "I've spent my career making decisions based on logic and strategy, but this, whatever this is between us, it's different, and I don't want to ignore it." Her breath hitched. She searched his face for answers, for reassurance, for anything that could make sense of what she was feeling. "I don't either," she admitted, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. Alexander's lips curved into the faintest smile, and he took a step closer. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotion, and for the first time, Emily felt herself let go of the doubts and fears that had held her back. Whatever happened next, she decided, she would face it head-on. Their relationship didn't unfold without challenges. They were careful, cautious, aware of the stakes involved. Alexander insisted on setting boundaries to protect Emily's position, and Emily worked harder than ever to prove that her achievements were her own. Their connection deepened in private, built on shared moments of vulnerability and trust. But not everyone was oblivious to the changes. Sophie, ever perceptive, pulled Emily aside one afternoon. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Emily froze. "What do you mean?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You've been different lately, happier maybe, and you seem more comfortable around Mr. Hayes than the rest of us." "Spill." Emily hesitated, torn between honesty and discretion. Finally she said, "Sophie, I can't say anything right now, but I promise, when the time is right, I'll tell you." Sophie studied her for a moment before nodding. "Just be careful, okay? This place can be a shark tank if you're not prepared." "I will," Emily promised, grateful for Sophie's understanding. Months passed, and Emily's hard work continued to earn her recognition. She was promoted to a role with more responsibilities, and though some whispers about favoritism circulated, her results spoke for themselves. She and Alexander navigated their relationship carefully, mindful of the delicate balance between personal and professional. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the quiet streets after a late dinner, Alexander stopped suddenly, turning to face her. "What is it?" Emily asked, her heart skipping a beat. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone serious but warm. "About us. About the future." She tilted her head, curiosity and hope mingling in her chest. And I want to build that future with you," he said simply, "whatever it takes." Tears pricked at Emily's eyes as she smiled. "I want that too." The rain began to fall softly, and as they stood there under the streetlights, Alexander pulled her into his arms, sealing their promises with a kiss that felt like the beginning of forever.